The Iran war is not just another Middle Eastern crisis. It is a brutal revelation for Germany. Yes, Germany. Everyone is watching Iran. They're watching the Strait of Hormuz. They're watching oil prices. They're asking the obvious questions. Who is winning? Who is losing? America? Iran? Israel? The Gulf states? But almost nobody is asking what this reveals about Germany. And they should, because Germany is already losing in this crisis. Not on the battlefield, not in headlines, but at a much deeper level. And the real question is not just what this war does to Germany now, it is whether Germany will finally learn the lesson this war is forcing on it. Because if it doesn't, it will keep losing crises it never even fights. Germany is not some small, irrelevant state. It is the third largest economy in the world by GDP. It is one of the world's biggest exporters and importers. And this is just Germany on its own. The wider European economy is deeply structured around Germany. Germany is its industrial core and its export center. So if you understand Germany's problem, you understand Europe's problem too. Germany lives from global trade. Its prosperity depends on energy and raw materials coming from outside Europe. Gas, oil, metals, chemicals, copper, lithium, iron, cobalt. A Mercedes does not begin in Stuttgart. It begins somewhere far away, in a mine, in a port, on a tanker, in a pipeline, across sea lanes. That means Germany depends on a world where those routes stay open, where goods keep moving, and where prices stay predictable. This is the material basis of the whole German model, its prosperity, its standard of living, the social contract it is so proud of, and its political stability. Germany's industry does not just need customers, it needs inputs. And Europe as a whole is nowhere near self-sufficient enough to ignore that fact. Among the great economic powers, Germany is one of the most dependent on global trade and open routes. For it, access to trade and resources is existential. So when people look at Germany, or Europe, as rich and advanced, they miss the more important point. This prosperity is not sealed inside Fortress Europe, it is exposed. The trade routes are not just flows of wealth and prosperity, they are also easy targets. And historically, every trading power understood that. It is not new. Statesmen, merchants, and strategists have always understood that trade and prosperity bring envy and uncompromising competition. If your wealth depends on long-distance trade, then it is exposed to pressure, blockade, sabotage, coercion, price shocks, and strategic blackmail. This was true for great trading powers in the past. Carthage understood this. Venice did. The Dutch and the English knew. And it is still true today. Germany today is, materially speaking, a maritime trading power. Not in the old imperial style, with its flag projected across the oceans. But in substance, yes. Its way of life depends on sea routes, on open trade, on energy flows, on global logistics, and on a world that stays open enough for all that to keep working. And here is the core of the whole argument. Germany wanted the prosperity of a maritime power, without the politics of a maritime power. That is the illusion. Germany, and Europe more broadly, wanted the benefits of this position without accepting its logic. They wanted the prosperity that comes from global trade, but not the harder political meaning of depending on that trade. Because once your way of life depends on sea lanes, energy imports, distant suppliers, and routes you do not control, then open trade is no longer just an economic fact. It becomes a security fact, a strategic fact, a question of power. And Europe tried very hard not to think in those terms. That was a great bet against history. I think a lot of discussion around this topic is too shallow. People say Germany didn't spend enough on defense, or Europe didn't reach some GDP target on defense. That is part of the story, but only a small part. Money is the easiest part to fix. The deeper problem is that Germany did not want to accept a very old reality. If you live from global trade, then you must also be willing to bear the cost of securing the routes and conditions that make that trade possible. And that cost is not just money, it is political cost, strategic cost, diplomatic cost, sometimes moral cost too. You have to be an actor, not just a commentator, not just a moral voice issuing principles, but a power that understands that order does not sustain itself. Yes, alliances and coalitions are part of the equation, but they are built around sovereign actors that have the power to uphold and enforce a common order, not just to speak about it. The deeper problem is that Germany began to behave as if this whole question had become outdated, as if the old link between trade, power, coercion, and security had somehow expired, as if the routes it depends on would remain open by themselves, as if someone else would always carry the burden, pay the cost, and make the harder choices. Germany outsourced the hardest part, above all, to the United States. It came to believe that security could be outsourced to America, that others would continue to accept a world in which German prosperity remained safe, legitimate, and broadly in everyone's interest. Those were extraordinarily naive assumptions, and that kind of naivety does not befit the world's third largest economy. The war in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz makes that brutally visible. This is not just a Middle Eastern, American, and Iranian story, it is also a German story. Germany, one of the greatest industrial powers of the world, can do little more than watch while others decide the fate of routes it depends on. Do not get distracted by the question of whether this was a wise American decision or a strategic mistake. Do not get lost in the debate about whether Trump is a geopolitical genius or an idiot. For Germany, that is beside the point. The important thing is this: these are American decisions. They came out of American politics, American voters, American establishment, American lobbies, American strategic priorities and internal struggles. Trump operates inside that system. So does American foreign policy. And if decisions made inside that system can radically change the cost of energy, the safety of trade routes, and the future of German industry, then Germany is not sovereign over the conditions of its own prosperity. That is the point. Not that German politicians will say nothing, not that Europe will be silent, but that at the decisive level, it is not Germany that shapes the situation. Trump is not explanation of German non-sovereignty. He is the stress test of it. He shows how exposed Germany really is, because Germany has tied so much of its fate to a political system it does not control. And there is also an Israeli angle that matters here too, because it sharpens the point. In the future of Hormuz, the actor is not just United States, it is also Israel. After all, the first war with Iran began as an Israeli attack. Germany has invested heavily, politically, diplomatically, morally, materially, in its relationship with Israel. It has been one of the Israelis' strongest and most uncompromising supporters. And yet, that does not mean Israel will act according to German interests. Why would it? Israel acts according to what it sees as its own security logic. That is what states do. The problem is the position Germany has put itself in. A much smaller country can shape Germany's economy and way of life because it is far more strategically decisive, and Germany can do very little about it. That should be humiliating for a country of German size. And the Iran war is not even the first warning. Germany already had one. Nord Stream, a vital gas pipeline between Germany and Russia destroyed by sabotage at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Germany could not protect a vital energy artery, and when it was hit, it did not respond like a country fully in control of its own interests. Let's not get lost in competing theories. Germany is looking for Ukrainian nationals in connection with the sabotage. Whether the Americans knew or not is not the key point here. The larger truth is simpler. Even if one believes that Germany had to end this energy dependence on Russia, that should have been a German sovereign decision. Germany could have shut that pipeline down itself. What it could not do was let others decide for it by blowing up a vital artery of its economic model. And that is exactly the point. A country of German weight could not protect a core condition of its own prosperity. It watched, and that is deeply revealing, that even weaker actors far more dependent on Germany's support than Germany was on them, could move inside the space of German vital interest without German interest becoming decisive. That tells you something, not about them, but about the Germany. The problem is not that other states pursue their own interest. Of course they do. That is politics. The problem is that Germany, and Europe with it, behaved for too long as if its own prosperity would be protected almost automatically, as if the world around it would preserve German interest by inertia, as if being rich, productive, rational, peaceful, and economically useful would somehow be enough. But systems do not protect anyone by themselves. They are maintained by actors. And if you are not serious enough as an actor, others will decide the fate of your prosperity. That is exactly what the Iran war reveals. Germany, and Europe with it, wanted the stability of power without accepting the burden of power. They wanted to live like a maritime power without thinking like one. That was not wisdom. It was strategic unseriousness and a historical misreading. Germany, and Europe with it, is no longer master of the conditions of its own prosperity anymore. And that has consequences. If Germany does not change, others will decide for Germany. Germany's problem is not that it is too small, not that it is too poor, not that it is objectively incapable of being a serious power. Quite the opposite. Germany is rich enough, central enough, and historically experienced enough that it should have understood the geopolitics of its own prosperity better than almost anyone. But it did not. Germany did not just forget history. It started to believe history no longer applied to it. It believed it could live from world trade without paying the full price of power, without carrying the full burden of sovereignty, without serious control over the order it depends on. That was the real gamble. The illusion that you can be one of the great winners of world trade without also being one of its power centers. Europe believed the old problems of power and dependence had somehow disappeared. They did not. Europe simply stopped wanting to think about them. And now reality is back.